Check 1 2. All right. I'm amplified. Okay. Welcome, everybody. We've got a special guest today, Eliah Aronoff-Spencer. Everybody welcome Eli. So Eli, you're from UC San Diego and the design lab there, right? And so we talked on the phone a bit, and you said something, you run a design team there. You have a title of designer at large, but you actually said you don't consider yourself a designer. Do you mind explaining what you mean that you're not a designer in that sense?
So a couple clarifications. I'm not sure I run a design team. I mean, we run a team, and I guess we build things, and I'm not sure that we have to be a design team to be that. And then I think what maybe you're getting at is there's maybe design with a capital D and design without a capital D. And so, I mean, choosing to go left or right for, as you leave your house in the morning is a design decision. And honestly, if left up to the field of design, you may never make that choice, or you might have to go through it so many times you haven't actually got it anywhere. So, and my point here is that there's a little bit of colonization of action by the term design. And the reality is everyone's a designer. And we design our clothes in the morning in the sense that we design our look, we design our meals, and honestly, these are really built on sort of open platforms. The open platform of your clothing is a mix and match. The open platform of your food that you can put together. And so I think everyone is a designer, and everyone who builds things needs to know a little bit about design. If you're an engineer, you have design principles that are down at the level of electronics, Kirchhoff's laws. You have design principles at the next level, like grounding things or making things not explode. And then every engineer thinks a little bit about usability, or they've been beaten to think about it. And you learn to think about the human factors and the person in front of you. And a nuclear physicist thinks about human factors and whether or not people are going to be asleep at the wheel and cause a major accident. And so I'm not sure what design is in the sense that if everyone has something, how do you carve it out and make it this thing over here?
I mean, it's obviously we've experienced this within our own teams as well, is that obviously they're the people who are formally went to design school and view themselves as designers, but the people who make a lot of decisions, even decisions to exclude something, right? So when you're in the process of building a technology, and in some sense, and again, this could be anybody on the team, says, maybe we shouldn't do this. That's a major design decision, and really subtraction is very important in design, right? What you leave out. And I mean, we've gone through so many phases of our team where design was sort of distinct from human factors, engineering was distinct from design, et cetera. And I hope we're in a bit of a happier place now where people are all contributing. And it's like you said, the lowercase d and the big case D. Now, what do you think about the corporatization, for lack of a better word, of design and design thinking? Because there's a lot of, it's now in the boardroom. Design thinking is in the boardroom. And now there's a lot of executives who take a half-day course in design, and now apparently they're authorities on design thinking. There's another extreme to oversimplifying what design is, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a good thing and a bad thing. So the good thing is that, and let's say we're talking about human-centered design, right? That can just make you think, like, what was I doing before that? And so you might actually have a person who's a CEO who has this epiphany. Says, we really have been sort of money-centered design, and then maybe that's killing people. Maybe I could find a way to be people-centered and make money. And so these tiny little flips could maybe make a big difference. And the other one is, like, how many people here have a lever that's big enough to move the world? Right? We don't really. And yet, like, what if we got one of these people with really big levers? The Pentagon, Microsoft. Right now, I like the KGB and the GRU. If I was going to hire somebody to get something done, I'm hiring Russia. They're really good. But if you can affect them, then you can really make a big difference. So that's the good side. The bad side is that if you glaze over, if you feel like you've done something, this is like, let's say you're a surgeon and you're sort of not a very thorough one, and you maybe closed the top part of the person, but not the bottom part, and they die after you leave, you know, that's not a good thing. And so if you have somebody who's, let's say it's a bad culture, it's a company, we won't name any, but there's a company with a bad culture, and they've been told they're going to learn design thinking to help people, right? And now they've had that, and then they go on saying, now I know design thinking, and they're still evil, but they feel better. And so, and there's going to be three. So this is the, those are the binaries. And the third one, which I actually think is a little more nefarious, there's a university with a very famous psychology class. And a lot of designers take this class, and a lot of computer scientists take this class. And it's really about how human behavior operates, and it's a lot about how we can basically be manipulated into making choices before we know that we've even done that. And it even gets into some existential things of like whether or not we make choices. So this is supposed to be the psychology of behavior, and it should be making everybody self-knowledge and the world a better place. But if you're an entrepreneurial person and without a strong background in like ethics, these are tricks that you can make other humans do things you want. And so design has become masterful at this. And so this is nuclear power. You know, with great power comes great responsibility. And it is true that design has gotten good at helping humans make choices that may or may not be the one they had in mind, right? These are the just-in-time alerts that make you eat less, and they're the, we won't get into addiction, et cetera, but like there should be a positive side to this. A lot of times it's manipulative. And so that's the other side, I think, about it. So we talk about needing an ethics or an ethos for design, and I think that's missing.
Right, and I mean, it's quite obvious, especially recently in the news over the last few years, is that, you know, very clever behavioral nudges, how things are framed have greatly influenced people on social media. You know, you've got some experience in Africa about the anti-vaxxers and that sort of thing that we're going to talk about. But you've done a huge amount of work in, you know, outside of the U.S. You've done, you know, I was just listing them: Venezuela, South Africa, Mozambique, Haiti, Uganda, Colombia. But, you know, you did mention, like, I caught the fact that you started in New York City, right, in a methadone clinic. What did you learn about design at you know, running a methadone clinic or working in a methadone clinic?
This is a well-timed question to my last answer. Everybody know what methadone is? This is good. This is Canada. You ask this question in America, and you actually, we're not that smart. So what do people think about heroin? Good drug, bad drug? Not a great drug, right?
Not a good drug.
Fentanyl? Not a great drug. What about methadone? People, it's more neutral. Because you know why? You don't really get that high. It's not that fun. And it hasn't really been used as a recreational drug. What's kind of amazing about methadone is when you take it, you don't want the heroin anymore. So how many people in this room have quit heroin? Okay. So hopefully the answer is none, because nobody's been stuck on it. And I'm serious, if there is somebody in here who's using drugs and having a hard time with it, I don't want you to feel, there may be, I don't want you to feel bad. This is a hard thing. And we tend to demonize people who have drug problems, in particular heroin and needles. You can get HIV and hepatitis C, you can overdose, you can die. So methadone's this amazing middle ground that says you're not evil, you're stuck on a drug that you can't stop, and this methadone can really help. Now the way we give it, there's a lot of arguments about if it's right or wrong. It's very paternalistic. So in America, the way you get methadone is you come to a methadone clinic every day, sometimes more than once a day. It's not convenient, right? And there's stigma. You go into that clinic, everybody knows you're a heroin addict or a methadone, right? It's hard to work, you know, and you can get special dispensation to take it with you, but it's tricky. So, but the methadone clinic I was at was one more thing. It did general medicine, family medicine, you know, your regular checkups. A lot of people with hepatitis C and liver disease and they would need to come in and have liquid taken out of their bellies, or heart failure. And they'd have to come in and we'd have to give them Lasix and diurese them. And the thing about this clinic is, so now, what's the no-show rate at an average clinic in Canada for a regular appointment? Does anybody know? I don't. This isn't
like
a test.
family doctor
Yeah.
appointment?
That's the kind of human factors question. You should know this.
I don't know. I would probably imagine it's at probably a quarter of all visits are no-shows.
So most places in the States, it's 30 to 50%, and we're
Wow.
getting better at, well, so our appointments were tied to getting this drug that you had to have every day. What was our no-show rate? Well, it wasn't 0, but why wasn't it 0? Because those people were dead. They'd gone on heroin because the methadone wasn't working anymore, and they were on the street somewhere passed out, or they were arrested. So when you got a no-show, you called the police, you called the jail, but that's not the point. The point was, if you pair crack with whatever else, you're going to get that other else. And so I saw in what's probably the most strong and slightly insane pairing that you get somebody addicted enough to a drug, you can get them to do other things, like go to their doctor's appointment. So that's a really hyperbolic overstatement, okay? This isn't the real world. But we actually can kind of manipulate our own people's psyches through, call it design. And we can do it in ways they don't even know. And so, you know, when you design healthcare products, there is a little bit of, this is gamification, right? Gamification and methadone are not unrelated. It brings up again that you need to recognize what you're doing when you start to do things like, oh, we'll gamify it, or, oh, you know, we found out that A/B testing has led that all users will do this one thing if we do this one other thing. But you need to step back and say, like, is this the right thing to do? What are the unintended consequences of this? And realize that this is another powerful thing. Like, people in this room, you're manipulators as much as you're designers. And so you have to have an ethos associated with it, which is, you know, kind of a first do no harm.
Right. Yeah. So from New York City, you decided to visit Venezuela, right? To learn about universal healthcare. So, like, I'm asking because New York City is pretty close to Canada, which does have universal healthcare. So why did you feel you needed to travel to Venezuela to learn about universal healthcare instead of Canada?
So the way I tell the story is that it's just trite to go to Canada or to Denmark. The truth is, I've been here. I lived in Montreal, and I've spent some time here.
Right.
And I spent a bit of time in Sweden and Denmark.
And we're arguably, we don't have universal healthcare, arguably, so.
Yeah.
We don't have pharmacare.
Yeah.
We don't have a national pharmacare
But you have,
program.
you know, you have what is important, which is sort of a conceptual framework in which you think that if you're going to form a government of the people, it should take care of the people.
Right.
And this is sort of a foreign idea where I live. Remember, Canada, America, like exactly the same until you look closely. And the other one is that I'd learned a little bit. I was naive. I need to be smacked in the head, okay? And literally in graduate school, I had an advisor who smacked me in the head a lot. And it was only after signing a consent form in which I'd requested it. And you have to, hard lessons are hard, right? So it wasn't that interesting to me to see how Denmark does universal health care. In the 90s, there was a boom of Turkish or Syrian immigrants who'd come into Denmark, the 2000s. But in say 1999, let's say, in Denmark, I mean, the foreignest thing you'd hit in Denmark would be a German. And the size of Denmark is, you know, you're not a big country.
6-7 million. Yeah.
They're smaller, right? It's like if Toronto decided to do universal health care and had, what's the place where all the oil is? The oil's resources.
Alberta.
Alberta, okay.
Yeah.
So you brought Alberta along, there weren't any people, so we'll just want your oil, right? And they agreed for some strange reason. That would actually be Norway and Denmark coming together. I don't think it's a challenge to figure out universal health care when you have a lot of resources and you have a homogenous group of people who basically over 2,000 years, they got rid of the people that weren't working right. I mean, co-design, participant design, most of the humanistic things we talk about, they come out of Scandinavia, but it's sort of like they tried everything else, you know? There's an interesting culture that worked for a really long time to get to where they are, and there's nothing we can really copy,
Right.
I think. So, and then truth is I really wanted to go to Cuba. And we actually have an exchange with Cuba, and I could have gone, but it's so logistically difficult to do at that time. And I wanted to go for a while, like 4 to 6 months. You have to carry cash. So if you use a visa when you're there, you'll be arrested when you come home. Well, this was 20 years ago. And it just wasn't practical.
Right.
And half of the Venezuelan healthcare system is run by Cubans. So I went to Venezuela. I mean, you know, there's other reasons. Can anybody imagine what the other reasons are? It's really nice there. I just did medical school. I mean, I'm being truthful, and I think it's really important to be honest in these things, right? So it was a combination of wanting to have some time to just be me, and then I also wanted to see things up close. I didn't need to see what sickness looked like.
Right.
I mean, New York has got that for you.
Right.
But I wanted to see what a culture that thought they should take care of their own people looked like.
Right.
And didn't have any money.
Yeah.
And actually Venezuela had a lot of, they were the richest country until recently in South America.
Right.
And they kind of did stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, probably around the same time, I was able to spend quite a bit of time in Cuba and their health system, and I mean, when there's resource scarcity like that, and how resourceful the Cubans become, and you're right to say that they basically became the consultants of Latin America on how health systems would work, and a heavy emphasis. You know, perhaps 90% of their resources were spent on primary care.
Yeah.
And I visited the one hospital that had an MRI, and it's really was only, you know, for party people that MRI was ever used. And they had trouble maintaining it because it had a lot of US technology. At least, well, you know, it was a Siemens MRI, but the software that was running it was American.
Was the other problem that's hard to get liquid helium there?
All kinds of logistic issues of maintaining it. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, 99.9% of Cubans would never see that MRI, right? But anyway, an interesting health system nonetheless.
Can I make a comment though about Cuba?
Yeah.
And Venezuela shares this. So they spend 90% on primary care, and everything else is preventative.
Absolutely.
But there's something really different. How many people went dancing last night? Okay, if I was in Venezuela or Cuba right now, what would the number be?
Dancing?
It would be like 100%.
Really?
It's crazy. So
Lots of clubs.
we go to the gym. They still have a healthy culture.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we're ruining it with TV and Facebook and American values. If you can't figure out why sometimes people get mad at the West, it's because we break functioning cultures. And so I want to bring that up because it is the elephant in the room in some ways, that where I was, smoking was less, drugs were less.
Yeah.
Church kept people clean. And they dance all the freaking time. And I mean, I was out with 80-year-old doctor husband and wives who were boogieing and maybe had six-packs and were like in shape.
Yeah.
So you couldn't survive in America.
Right.
We wouldn't know what to do with you.
Right.
So there's a lot of these hidden factors that, and they don't get told if you don't really go and see that. So I thought that was important.
So then you went off to South Africa, and you were exporting some, you know, UCSD therapies. This
is pre-UCSD.
Oh, was it? This antiretroviral stuff that you were going to set up in this clinic, right? This HIV clinic. So you had a bit of an experience there because nobody was showing up to this new clinic that you created. Why was that?
Okay, well, again, truth in advertising. I didn't create the clinic. So I think you're talking about the one, the Manguzi clinic with the witch doctor? Okay.
With the witch doctor, yes. The Sangomas.
The Sangoma. So there was a tricky thing in South Africa until not that long ago, which is that the argument about whether or not HIVs caused AIDS was still going there, thanks to an American doctor named Peter Duisberg, who kind of convinced the president of South Africa that HIV wasn't causing AIDS, and therefore antiretroviral drugs that would save the lives of your people shouldn't be used, let alone paid for. And so it was practically illegal to even treat people with HIV. In top right corner of South Africa, at the border of Mozambique, there was a clinic in a town called Manguzi Hospital, and there was a nascent antiretroviral AIDS clinic, right? And it was run, I wish I could remember her name, Laura. Really excuse me, I have a cold, passionate woman who basically knew she was breaking the law. And we had a hospital clinical director, I guess I shouldn't use names, so there was the director of the hospital was supporting her. And this was an interesting thing because I think he was at risk by supporting her. I know he was at risk. These doctors were arrested the week after I left. And the problem was there was a lot of pride that we'd set up this antiretroviral, this AIDS clinic, and we knew that the prevalence of HIV in this area was ridiculous. I mean, it was like sometimes 60%. We had no referrals. Nobody came in. We'd advertised, hey, we can fix your HIV. Nobody comes in. And still one of the wisest guys I've ever met. Colin basically knew what was, named this person, basically knew what was going on. So there's an old and functioning healthcare system in actually much of the world. And it's the Sangomas in Africa, these witch doctors, those traditional healers. Do you think they're a universal coverage paid for by the government? They don't charge you anything, no copays? You don't go to a Sangoma with nothing. Like, there's a fee. It could be money. I'm not joking. It could be chickens. And the talk he watched, it's chickens. And it's true. It's like 2 to 4 chickens for a sore throat, or you know, I forget the economy here, but so the witch doctor was treating these people with AIDS. Okay, I'm not going to give him a hard time for doing that. It wasn't working. So what were we? We're a business threat. We would drive business away from the poor witch doctor. So Colin had a solution, like instantaneously. He goes to the witch doctor. This is a terrible name. He goes to the Sangoma. He goes to the village healer, and he gives him a cell phone. And this is like brick day cell phones. And also it's pre-MCash, what's this term? Mobile money.
Yeah.
It's pre-mobile money. But what you could do is you could, you can do this still, you could send credits to people through these crazy short text codes. Has anybody ever had sent credit on an old phone? It's like star 17 numbers, pound 16 numbers, star, and then the phone number of the person.
Yeah.
But you can do it. And so our doctor went to their doctor, gave them the phone, and basically said, I'm giving you the phone. I think he gave him like some basic credit every month. And then every time you refer a patient to me, our clinic, I'll pay you in mobile, not mobile money, in credits.
In credits.
But it turns out the way you buy credits at that time in South Africa is you get these little scratch off for 50 cents or $1. People can't afford hundreds of dollars at a time, so they're buying cell phone credits like every day. So what's this called when you can take one thing and put it into another? I mean, it's functionally money. So the cell phone credit was essentially an economy. And so we were basically, I take credit, I use the we, but I have nothing to do with this, I want to be clear.
Right.
Our doctor, working with their doctor, found this other system that would work for everybody.
Right.
That guy got the credit, and there was a tweak on this, and I actually don't remember the details right, so I fear I'm filling in memory with lies. But there was something where the doctor got credit for it too, the Sangoma. Like, I think we sent the patients back to him and to thank him or something. So it was like, you know, let's say that you have a regular doctor and you have a heart problem or something like that, and they catch it, and they refer you to the heart doctor, and that doctor fixes you. You're still grateful to the doctor who referred you to the heart doctor, right? So our doctor had kind of figured out some system where that was maintained.
Right.
So it wasn't just money, it was about respect and face. But I don't know a single designer alive who could have done this, and my doctor did this and would do 10 things like this a day, every day for years.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's human-centered design and design, and that's expertise over an expert. And that's actually where I think you probably want to drive this conversation too, which is that we need to stop capitalizing things. And we all need expertise, and we're going to have different expertise. And just because somebody isn't the expert, again, if anybody's coming to dinner after the drinks come out, I'll tell you about what people with expertise have done to experts in my observations.
Right.
So
I mean, and you're right to say that he wasn't a designer. This was a systems design problem. Nobody was coming to the clinic, and I'm assuming people started coming to the clinic once this was.
it did.
They
It worked.
figured this out, and I mean, you know, I'm always continually impressed with what some of the students have done here, and you know, Jason Hearn, our student who was here for a couple of years and who's now in medical school, but took it upon himself to learn about how a heart failure clinic in Uganda would work. And he spent an entire summer there not suggesting anything, but just trying to learn. And he discovered mobile money, and he figured out this path on how you could deliver something comparable to what we're delivering here, but in the context of a technology which is basically a feature phone using the same codes as mobile money, and figuring this all out. And I mean, he was a student of user-centered design. He knew the principles, but you know, there's a certain level of naivete going in there, and just being able to absorb and learn, right? Because basically, I warned him not to go. The only advice that I gave him is don't go in there being presumptuous, and certainly don't go in there thinking that you're going to solve all these problems, because you might come out, and if this is totally fine, is that, you know what, we can't solve this problem, right? So anyway.
I keep doing this and
Yeah,
reflecting
sure.
back and forth, and it's related to this. So we left this HIV story as a happy story, right? Everybody feels really good about what happened, yeah? I left, I think it was 7 days later, the government raided that clinic. And the heroes of this story, I say they went to jail, but I don't actually know that's true. I think they were arrested, and I know they went to court. And then they were exonerated by the high court in South Africa, but they could have gone to jail. So had they not been successful, and we got no HIV cases, their lives might have been better. So this wasn't a full-blown, I solved the problem and created a new one, but do recognize that sometimes you can solve problem A and create problem B,
Right.
and that problem B could be, it could be really bad. And how you predict that, I don't know.
So on that kind of what's happened to you when you went to Mozambique, right? You went in with good intentions, and you put in a bunch of technology, but you had an unforeseen negative outcome. Why don't you tell the audience about that?
All right, so first of all, never go to another country and say, how can I help, okay? We got a large grant. Again, I was a very significant part of this grant, but
It was a participatory design,
yeah, so we had
broad in scope.
across 2 grants, we had something like $20 million from USAID, from PEPFAR. This is the U.S. government arm that gives money for HIV funding. And this had been running for quite some time, and there had been felt that there were a lot of failures. And the person who ran it, I can't say his name, Eric Gooseby, because you should look this guy up. He's kind of a magical person. He's an old-fashioned doctor from San Francisco General. They made him ambassador, a PEPFAR ambassador. And he kind of recognized that a lot of the money they were giving away was being wasted. The HIV care wasn't happening because they were putting money into systems that had no systems. Like Mozambique had no true functioning healthcare delivery system outside of the main city. And in the main city, you had one hospital for 3 million people. Mozambique has, I don't know, is it 30, 40 million people? It's about the size of Canada. Land mass, not so much. Weather, maybe a little better. There were, I think at the time, there were 800 doctors on paper. Of those, 250, I think, were practicing. 125 of them were in the city. And probably 80% of those were doing private practice. And there was one public hospital. So to say there was a healthcare system is kind of pushing it.
Right, yeah.
So what are you going to do with $20 million and like lots of really big, lofty goals when there's no system to deliver it through? It's like, it's like I got a Maserati or whatever your famous fast car is, and like there's no roads.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? Sit there in my driveway?
Right.
And so Eric and actually my boss at the time, Chip Schooley, had a pretty strong, like, maybe instead of delivering healthcare and delivering HIV care, first we should do some health system strengthening, and then we can add on the antiretrovirals and et cetera. So I was responsible for the portion of writing of this grant on basically infrastructure. And infrastructure here was not roads, it was internet, diagnostics, informatics capability. And then I said, well, we also need to have things like open source and work with partners who can do kind of what you do now, which is make things local, sustainable, and developing from knowledge that's close.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a problem, and you say, wow, I hear you, let's work together to solve it. So this is basically capacity building, internal knowledge capacity building. So we had a lot of money. We went in, there's a big fiber optic cable that runs down the coast of East Africa called CECOM, and we ran a fiber from CECOM to the beach in Maputo, the capital of Mozambique, and from there to the university. And we literally turned on internet for the hospital. And the interesting thing was the hospital got the internet, so did the university, because there was just more than they knew what to do with.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with two groups. I worked with a group of doctors, and I worked with a group of, they're called informaticos, which is like, it's more computer scientists than what we now call informatics. They're basically computer engineers. And by that, what I mean is they could code, but they also like ran UDP cable, and they made I wish we had more time, I would tell you the story of the extension cord. There were no extension cords in Mozambique, and I finally learned they made the only ones. And so these were people who did everything, right?
Right.
So we turned internet on. So my Mozambican doctor friends, I was kind of legitimately awed by. So first of all, they were way better dressed than any one of us. They were harder working than all of us. They had about the same level of medical education as us. Sharp, good doctors. They probably cared more. They were less entitled. And on top of that, they had second jobs. Like they were doing residency and trying to train and then going and working in another clinic because they didn't make enough money to feed. And they're also, I don't know if you're probably similar here to Americans, we're a bit later in life, right? When you're 24 there, they were married and had 3 kids and were supporting whole families, right? And so I just honestly, and I remember this, when you come from another country that's rich and you tell people they're awesome, they believe you. And then they get more kind of like, I am awesome, right? And so we gave them internet, we showed them Google, showed them Facebook, and they went on Google and they looked to see what other doctors around the world were like, and they're like, they're not cooler than we are. Then they looked and saw what other doctors made around the world. And it's just like, I mean, it's embarrassing. They made less money than the Cuban doctors that were coming as doctor slaves. And did I mention Mozambique's a socialist country? Estamos juntos means we're all in this together. So what would you do if your doctor's in a socialist country and you find out you're not making enough money?
Go somewhere else.
No, you go on strike. This is what you do. You organize, right? Okay, so they organized on Facebook, right? What do you think their privacy settings were?
Default.
Yeah, right.
Default settings.
Who set up that Facebook account? I did. So proud of it. The UCSD, UEM, University Eduardo Mondlane, MEPI something. It was Grupo Descasao. Well, so, and now I'll use names. My friend Manuel Tomas, I think, was the leader, and Lucia Chambal and all the people I knew, they organized. What happened? They got arrested. How did they get arrested, and how did they figure out who was leading it? They went to Facebook. They just read who was doing stuff. There was no question about it. So, all right, so that's about, I'm not even going to give you the lesson there. I think you got the lesson. I want to tell you one more story, though.
So sorry, you got your friend arrested, is it?
Yeah.
But he got out, right?
He got out,
It's
and now-
like you never told the ending. Like everything's okay now, right? So-
Everything is okay. In fact,
Right.
all of it. So basically what happened is outside of America, this was actually covered in the news. And my favorite, I have a news clipping from Al Jazeera. They gave a full page on this in Al Jazeera. And they didn't say Eli or Americans went and caused this. And there's nobody, in fact, I probably even shouldn't be telling this story because nobody's ever gone back and blamed us. That's probably a...
But you feel some responsibility
Well,
because
I
you
think
turned on the internet.
It's rather than taking responsibility, it's making the story tell another story.
Sure.
But I think the more important story is the other group. So the group of doctors that were, I call them my friends, they are my friends. They were naive to technology. There's this, what's this term?
Luddite?
Yeah, no, it's like this, the opposite of digital native. It's like your 90-year-old grandma who gets an iPhone for the first time. They were pretty naive to the kind of technologies we were bringing in. The computer scientists guys, they weren't. They were coding. They just had like, you know, a little dial-up modem. They had internet, but it was useless. They were ready for it. They knew a lot. They knew about privacy. They knew a lot about security because they were the ones who had to clean all the bugs. And I mean, all the people really love Microsoft in Africa. And its version, whatever 7 versions ago is, so it's just covered in viruses.
Right.
So these guys know about viruses and this stuff, right?
Right.
So on my, I think it was my last night there, I went out to dinner with them. We had some drinks, and I did the same talk. I was like, you guys are amazing. I empowered them, right? I said, what are you going to do that's bigger than you're doing today? And not that you're not doing enough. And they said, we're going to start our own company. So I think I left, and then I come back, and they had started a company called Braveheart Productions. Can't choose company names, right? And they built the first emergency services network for Mozambique. And they very quickly realized that many people didn't have cars, although many people did have cars and not really much to do. There were really no ambulances for regular people, and I think there were 2 ambulances in the country at the time, and you can guess who they were for, right? And these were just post-J2ME phones. These were like the first version of Android phones. So they built an app that would allow either J2ME, or so feature phones, or smartphone, to basically dispatch an ambulance. That's cool. But that's not enough because people don't have money. Like, you have to build an incentive structure and an economy around it. So there were 2 warring cell phone companies in Mozambique. We'll call them Vodacom and Mcell. And honestly, these are, you know, like the richest man in Mexico got his money from cell phones. If you don't know that that cellular technology makes people rich, it does. And this was like one of the biggest economies in Mozambique at the time. Like every event, every music event is Voda or Mcell. And so they went and they basically played a game and they said, listen, because people can choose back and forth whether or not they go to Voda or Mcell. And sometimes you make that choice on cost, sometimes it's coverage, right? And sometimes it's just on, like, one of the companies sponsored an event you liked. It's very much branding. And they're really afraid of losing customers. They fight for them. And so these guys said, you know, this 911 thing would be really cool, wouldn't it? It'd be kind of the thing if you had it and it was free for all your customers, but that other group didn't, that would be a competitive advantage, wouldn't it? And so I think they didn't get past the first one. They're like, yep, we'll take it as long as you don't go to the next one.
Right.
And I haven't followed the sustainability of the story, and I haven't followed whether or not there's still a functioning 911 system based on this. But look at the difference between the 2 groups.
Right.
How they, and just in terms of how they were prepared for a technology,
Right.
what they did with it, but also those guys weren't designers either.
They weren't, but you know, it's kind of like they created ride sharing before Uber did.
Yeah.
So Uber ripped them off.
Yeah.
Basically, it's because it's Uber for ambulances, basically.
In 2009, when did Uber start?
Not well.
Let's not find out the truth because I like this version better.
Exactly. Let's talk about the stuff that you've done. We have about 20 minutes left. Stuff that you've done more recently with the Gates Foundation, because they came to you with something that they've tried repeatedly trying to solve, and you know, the way you tell it is you were their last chance at fixing this. So tell us what problem the Gates Foundation came to you with that they wanted you to solve.
They wanted to fingerprint babies.
And why would they want to fingerprint babies?
Do I get to tell the joke about the Uganda part first?
Sure.
Okay, so I was working in Uganda, and I had just quit a program where we were doing adult male circumcision. Perhaps the strangest thing I've ever done.
10 million males.
Yeah, I mean, and that was our portion. I think it was like the whole, in 22 countries, it was more. A lot of forced things dropped off.
And that was for basically.
So this prevents HIV. Okay, this is the
HIV.
equivalent of having a vaccine that's 50 to 60% efficacious, and there are really strong clinical reasons to do this. It's a super weird concept, and we're not going down that rabbit hole. I just want to tell you, I left. I quit that project. And I mean, and again, my memory is fuzzy. I think I arrived on a Monday, and I think I got the call on like the next day, but this may not be true. But very close in succession from leaving Uganda, we got a call from the Gates Foundation saying, do you want to fingerprint babies? And I thought it was a joke. It was like, okay, you're doing adult circumcision, now we're going to fingerprint babies. And it wasn't a joke, and it turned out that they lose babies all the time. They vaccinate kids who've already been vaccinated, or don't vaccinate kids who need it, because kids can't tell you their name, and sometimes it wouldn't even matter. So people understand that if you can't match a person to records, you make mistakes. And Gates was delivering vaccines. They're probably one of the stronger groups delivering vaccines worldwide. And they were delivering antiretroviral therapy or prevention of mother-to-child transmission HIV, but they didn't really know who they were doing it to. And they were kind of like not advertising it, but it was a problem. So they, I think the first thing they probably did was they went and grabbed some devices off the shelf, and they went and tried them with babies, and they don't work. These are adult technologies. Babies are different. And then, so I think they went through a chain of experts, experts in biometrics. And then the last person before that, we won't use names now, was really well known in our field. And as far as I can tell, I don't know him personally, but a nice guy and really smart. In fact, he's on my panel in Africa coming up. And I'm like a little nervous because he's really smart. He knows everything about this. And he was the guy who got the contract before me, and I'm the next guy.
Right.
So these were, what I'm trying to tell you is smart, nice people had tried to fingerprint babies before me, and it hadn't worked. And I wasn't going to go try what they'd done and think I was going to do better. So we said, what could we do?
A tweak wasn't going to work here.
A tweak wasn't going to work, yeah. You know, do you remember that, it's kind of a horrible paternalistic story about this whole, like, we don't ask the public what they want. This is the Ford story, because they would ask for faster horses or Bucky whips or whatever.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I didn't think I was going to be able to go take what they'd done and just do a little more and be better.
Yeah.
And I actually said, let's use human-centered design. And so human-centered design asks a couple things. One, it has to be annoying. Whatever problem is stated to you as a human-centered designer, you have to destroy that problem. You have to say, is that really the problem? And you keep, and there's ways to do this. You ask the 5 whys. Why is this the problem? They say, oh, it's really this problem. You say, well, why is that? You do it 5 times and you get to the root problem. So we spent a lot of time not looking at the root problem of why we should fingerprint. That was pretty clear. But why had fingerprint failed? Or why had current fingerprinting technologies failed? And it turns out, and it was very much a technology-centric approach, that the way we fingerprint adults is with a piece of glass, and there's a camera underneath, and you put the finger down, and your fingerprints don't go away, because by the time you're an adult, your skin is strong. So what do we all know about babies? In particular, we say about babies' butts something, right? What is it? They're soft. What do you think their fingerprints are like? Super soft. So you put a fingerprint on the glass, what happens? It disappears. And that's what was happening. And there's physiology behind this. Your keratin isn't cross-linked, your collagens are changing. But we actually just said, well, okay, the classic human-centered design thing is to say that the technology is the problem. And the next one in human-centered design is make sure you're solving the right problem. The next one is you've got to iterate, and you can't iterate in the lab. And if there's a more clear story than you got to iterate with people, I don't know it. Because babies' physiology isn't just different, their behavior is different. We call them non-compliant, right? And non-adherent and all these things, yeah? And so we had to work with them, and it wasn't just the baby. There's other people in this little system called the parents, caregivers, et cetera. So we had to find technologies that were acceptable, right? I'm going to point something at you. Do you like that? No, but that's what we do when we scan eyes, right? And in some cultures, you're not even allowed to take a picture of somebody. You literally steal their spirit. So actually, eyes were out. It wasn't just fingerprinting. They said, any way you can do it, you can do it.
Any unique biometric ID.
Because we tried to get rid of the fingers for a while, and we couldn't. We had to go back to the fingers.
Some sort of biometric ID,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
And so we were stuck with fingers, and we said, well, clearly the glass is the problem, so we'll get rid of the glass. But the glass was also the solution, because it was really easy to take a finger and jam it down on glass and hold it still. And babies aren't compliant, so it was okay. When you got rid of the glass, you now had to figure out how to get a baby to hold still. and that's impossible or near impossible. So we had to iterate a lot on, I guess what you'd call ergonomics or interaction design, so that a finger of a baby could be imaged from below without a piece of glass. And it sounds easy, and it was just like every week we thought we were there. And a new baby would come in, and they would do something like, oh man. I mean, our winner, we thought almost chopped off a baby's finger. Drew blood. And at first, so mom knows this. So the way we worked was we had our fingerprint scanner, and we have a 50-inch high-definition TV that's projecting that fingerprint at, well, it's 3,500 points per inch. It's a significant, this little finger this big is on a 50-inch screen, right? And we're doing this thing, and mom's looking this way, and I hear my engineer go, oh my God. And I hear our biometrician go, and I look up, and there's just blood coming down. Shit. So we take the finger out, and I look at it, and there's no blood on there. And I realized we were so highly magnified that it had bled, but you really couldn't see it. And so we
droplet of blood, a micro droplet of blood. Yeah.
Clean the finger, stop the experiment, tell mom. We're like, Mom, we think just a little. She looks at the finger, doesn't see anything, but hadn't seen the other one, and then that device went on the wall of shame, wall of fame. So we have hundreds of devices on the wall of shame, and but we're proud of our shame, right? So you have to fail fast. You have to let go when it's time to let go, but you are never 1 week away. Mm-hmm. I mean, this took like 3.5 years. After we knew the answer, it was 3.5 more years.
So you cracked it in the end.
And so, yeah, so at the end of January, we finished a trial of 500 kids in Mexico, and we did good.
What's it look like?
Glad you asked that. So in America, we call this the panda. In Mexico, we call this el panda. Turns out pandas are universal. There's no country on the planet we've been that doesn't know what a panda is or find some affinity to them. This has been to, this one, the latest place I went was Mali. And it glows a little bit, and it's cute. Does anybody think it's cute? I think it's cute. So mom's going to accept it. Babies don't give a crap about that kind of cute.
They're probably too young. Like, what's the age when you say baby? It's how old?
I mean, we haven't quite got them when the hand's reaching out of mom, but we've got them pretty close. We are talking about, it was a horrible metaphor. We've got them within hours of birth.
Really?
And we've done preemies down to about 35 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was the constraint, is that we're talking about brand new infants.
Fresh. Yeah. So the way, and this is a lab prototype. It's kind of amazing. If I saw this 10 years ago, I would say, oh my God, that's a commercial piece of hardware, right? I mean, it's not that beautiful, but it's not that bad. And this is a prototype. And so it's cool, and we're all living this, is we can really prototype well now. And so we had to develop this thing that could actually have different sizes because babies grow. And the way this works is, so the biggest size here is actually for a baby's palm pad. We put them in here like that, or a mom's fingerprint. And then the size is just kind of, so the industrial design will change when this becomes a commercial product. You don't need a rotary, et cetera. But we had to accommodate, you had to build the technology for the people, right, because you can't really redesign people. And that was the big lesson I think we learned about that. And so the main lessons were redefine the problem, figure out what the real problem is. You may be the problem. Design for people, not the other way around. And you never get it right. And you're just going to have to go do it a lot and iterate and iterate and iterate. And your team's going to get tired because they're like, they thought it was over. So you have to figure out ways to keep your team together when stuff's hard.
Wow. Excellent. Questions from the audience? I think Olivia has a question.
No, you need a microphone.
You need a microphone.
So this can be broadcast internationally.
Hello. Oh boy. All right. So thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. And I guess my question is, so you touched on a couple things in terms of some of like the international projects you've been doing in terms of the culture, but even like the outcome, for example, in South Africa that you mentioned, that the people who were trying to innovate locally ended up getting arrested. So I guess my question is, one, how do you kind of try to foster and support local innovation in places like that where they don't actually respect like the individual like basic rights of those people?
This is a 3-hour answer.
Sorry.
So I have to. I'm gonna red team you a little bit. So there's a lot of assumptions there, right? And I'd say that those assumptions could be unpacked, or you could just say they're all true, everywhere, and not true. So that's the first statement. The second is, it's a great question, which is really, and the one honestly that I've moved my whole career on now, which is, where are problems and where are innovation? So where is innovation? I'd say this is a place of innovation. The famous one is that new Starship in Palo Alto, Apple's new billions and billions of dollars, or up in Redmond with Microsoft. Yeah. Where are the problems? They're in South Africa. So we have this huge mismatch or voltage where the money and the builders are in one place and the people with problems are in another place. And there's a big us and them. We built this for them, right? And I think you're trying to get to, like, how can they build this for themselves? And let's just say we, because there is no them. There's all of us, that's big. And there's no there, it's just here, but a little far away. This is honestly, I'm trying to get companies to believe something. Let's take an example of a large multinational company. We're gonna make it up. It's gonna be one that makes products and doesn't take any data from you, okay? So those products, what that means is they actually don't know a lot about their users, right? It's not, we'll take an example of any social media company that knows a lot about their users, right? So when you're trying to innovate and you're a company that knows a lot about your users, it's kind of easy. And you can even do it not for what they want, but for what you want, because you've figured out from all this user data. So imagine you're a company that just makes stuff and that stuff goes out into the world. What are you really afraid of? You're afraid of challengers. You're afraid of somebody in another country who says, I can make it better, I can make something. You're not, you know, the only way they know is how many units they sell, right? That intelligence isn't there. So you could go to these large companies and say, why don't you go to the place where the most problems are and put your resources there and actually hire the people with the problems? They're gonna be really innovative. And you can even do some co-design, participatory design, where you work in multidisciplinary teams and you have people who really deeply understand the problem and people who really deeply understand how to solve problems, not that problem. And as a team, you can build solutions, right? So if you do this in places where there is or are lots of problems, you actually can solve a number of problems. You can solve the problem for the company, which is, how do I find innovation and how do I find the next thing so I can survive? Okay, we don't want the company to go out of business. 2, you solve the problem for the people in the area. So locally, it's really well matched, hopefully. Just like Braveheart Productions. They didn't try to get in, it's like 80, you know what is it? It's like $150,000 to build an ambulance. They didn't say, we're gonna solve 911 by building high-class ambulances. They started somewhere else. So you get this impedance matching or resource matching when things are done locally. And there's another crazy one. So think about this. Let's go to, I don't want to pick on a place, but imagine the place with the most problems. It's a city, and it's got lots of people, and it's got lots of problems. So if that city solved a few of those problems and had some commercial entity that was selling those solutions, what would happen to that city? It would get rich, right? So the last, and this is the super tricky part I haven't figured out, because right now I've got companies on board on this whole go over there, but I haven't got them on board on keeping the money over there. And so they're moving. They're moving because you can share. And in fact, you just tell them, look, right now it's one of those like 50% of nothing or whatever. You know, if you go over there, you're going to make so much money that you can split 50-50. And what's interesting is it solves the development problem. You don't have to do more USAID development, going over and saving and helping people. You go to the places with problems. When they innovate, if they get to keep those solutions, people are going to buy those solutions in another place, right? So it can also help with the economy. So I think that was an answer. I don't know, was it an answer?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
Any other questions? Anja?
Thank you, Eli. Those are really great stories. So one of the things that sort of stood out for me was when you said that, you know, the reason people don't like Americans and Canadians or people from the West is because we break cultures, right? We break them. And so your comment about dancing in Cuba really resonated. And so I think, like, you know, as a counterpoint to the previous question, how do we kind of bring those innovations, and they're not even innovations, but how do we learn from other cultures? And unbreak our culture of breaking?
I have no idea. I mean, I've seen things like you know, I see my thumbs getting bad and my neck getting bad because I'm addicted to my iPhone, and I see, I don't know, almost all of the relationships I know failing because of social media here. And then I go to Mozambique and I don't. And this is my favorite example. There's a boys group that goes on Thursday night. You know, this is classic. The wives let them stay home, and the wives have actually their own one. And this one's, but it's boys only. So I got invited into it. It took me years. And they finally, like, they'd all disappear. They'd never, I'd say, you guys want to go out to dinner? And it'll be a Thursday. And they'd say, no. Friday? Yes, right? I didn't know about this. And they finally let me in. So we go out to.
This is a Mozambique
This is in
boys
Mozambique.
club
Yeah.
on
yeah.
Friday night.
Guys, Thursday.
Thursday.
And they would go to, I think there were only 2 restaurants they went to. One was a Thai, and I don't remember the other one. And it was maybe, there's probably 12 to 15 of them, and then at any given time, 8 to 10 are there, right? And so we're sitting at the dinner table, and now my Portuguese is terrible, but at the time I could follow a conversation, I could speak. And they would go back and forth between English and Portuguese, sometimes to help me, sometimes just because they would. But I could not understand what was happening. And I just couldn't figure it out, and I finally called it out. I was like, guys, I've been here for an hour and a half, and I have no idea what you're talking about. Would you explain what's going on? And they went, oh, you're not in the WhatsApp channel. And I went, well, why the hell would I care about that? You're here. And they said, no, we're not. And they all lift up their hands. And so we're at dinner, and I think that we're having one conversation, but what's really happening is they have a WhatsApp group, and underneath the table, there's a whole other conversation going on, right? Sometimes around me, like things like, you know, we got to entertain the monkey. That was what they were calling me at the time, right? We got to entertain the monkey, make sure the monkey's happy, right? Or what do you think about those guys at that table over there? So they're touch typing and present. And so I thought about this, and I was like, wow, that's actually WhatsApp not breaking a culture, and it's giving them this like extra sense, or ESP, right?
Yeah.
And they were more social, more connected, and now they had this like tight group that could exclude me while I was there. And so I think there's this neat thing that happens when you go to cultures. There's a bad thing and a neat thing. The bad thing is you can watch how the technology can destroy the culture. The neat thing is that sometimes these cultures will pick them up and use them in healthy ways we never thought about. And if it's possible for us to learn from that, that would probably be useful. In terms of the preventing the downsides, I really don't know. Like, I think we're in a really huge, big problem because it's killing our relationships, it's killing our exercise. All of the countries that are modernizing, these low, middle, high income, are going through the exact same problems, which is they move from healthy cultures with unhealthy water to stable cultures with good water to being fat and hating their relationships and basically calling themselves American. Like, and I've seen it just like, I haven't seen a good example. Now there's a lot of, you need to talk to a development expert on this because there are examples, but I think this is like the major vexing problem of our time. And I'll tell you, like, if I see Johnny Ive, I mean, you know, because the man who invented the iPhone is dead, but Johnny's still alive, right? What's the word I'm using? I'd kick him in the teeth. Because unintended consequences are that my thumbs hurt. So there's a syndrome in which your head falls off your shoulders now. So you're seeing it more I think it's more reported in Asia. I think we're seeing it here just as much. These kids are doing this. Your head's really heavy. It's not meant to be this way. You can't support it. So your spine gets subluxed, and you're basically becoming these hunchbacks of Notre Dame.
This is an actual medical condition.
This is a medical condition.
Mhm.
I call it head falling off of your shoulders, but there's another term for it. And, you know, how many people here have seen the movie The Jerk?
Yes.
Okay, so
the glasses.
everybody here needs to go see this movie. It used to be
1976.
if you did
Steve Martin.
if you wanted to do design, you had to watch The Jerk, and I highly. Can you make them do this?
Yes, I can.
I mean, honestly, you can just put it up on the screen. So the point is this, you know, Steve Martin. God, I just wish I could recite the first line of the movie, but I can't because it's so impolitic. But this is a complete bumbling idiot who develops a way of taking your glasses off easier. So I think it was so that
It's
you
a
didn't
grip.
get,
It's
so
some
you
sort of
didn't
grip.
get your glasses schmutzy.
That's right.
And what it did is it made the entire planet cross-eyed. And they sued him and took away all his money. Rightfully so. And that's why I'm going after Apple.
That's right. Wouldn't happen today. It happened in 1976, though.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question. I have one closing question, but anything else?
They're afraid now.
They're afraid now. Okay, so my final question now that we're out. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Make it hardball.
Thanks. I guess, what are your thoughts on design these days seems to be a lot of change for the sake of change and not trying to get sort of to the root of the problem. So like if you look at, say, like chairs or a spoon or a fork, it's largely the same over the last 100 years with refinements. Whereas in a lot of software these days, it's a lot of just arbitrary change. And so someone will say like, oh, like the iOS interface hasn't changed for the last 10 years, so
we
that
have
sucks.
to change it.
And so people aren't looking for like what the root solution is, just sort of the window dressing to make it look nice or just change it.
I think you need to go watch all 3 movies of The Matrix. I mean, what you are getting at
The
is...
Jerk and the Matrix movies.
Yeah, so what you're getting at is the fundamental question of like life and how to keep us entertained before we die. And I think that is a huge, I think it's actually an existential question and not a design question. Truly, some things are like, it's evolution and teleology. Our spoons are this way because they've gotten this way, and they may not need improvement. And software and these things, the incentives aren't making the world better. That's about distraction, et cetera. But the point is there always needs to be a more complicated game, otherwise we get bored and we kill each other, right? And I think that's what I took away from The Matrix, which is that essentially, like, life's tricky. None of us, and I don't want to send everybody here down on like a nihilistic drinking binge because of the way I spoke, but you know, life's really unsure. I don't know anybody here has the answer. I definitely don't. And we do these things to distract ourselves, okay? I mean, that's my Buddhist answer. In fact, they asked the Dalai Lama what's the #1 problem with society today, and he said distraction. And because when we're doing these things, we're also maybe not answering the bigger questions, like, what is the real problem? But I don't know what the real problem is, so I can't help. Again, I don't know if that was an answer.
So, to end, the biggest distraction in Toronto today, you being from California, you're visiting Toronto. My only question is Warriors or Raptors?
Dude, I mean, this is willful neglect because I'm a Warriors fan. Yeah. No, but wait. Like, and I said this, like, you guys have never really had the love. And so I'm more egalitarian. And while, I mean, I grew up with like Mitch Richmond and the great days of Golden State.
Right.
You need this a little bit.
We do.
And so, like, you know, it was like when Chicago's in the you know, I mean, if you're not rooting for them, you're a jerk.
All right. On that note, let's thank Eli. All done. Okay. That was fun.